is Chris Overby, and I'll be your host for today. The objective of this program is to inform the African community about the resources available for better integration within the community. The mode of traveling from point A to point B is rapidly changing. On today's show, we'll talk about some of these changes and also get into what that means for the taxicab industry. I'm joined by the chairman of the DC Taxicab Commission, Mr. Ernest Chopra. Welcome to the show, sir, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure. Well, let's get into you're the chairman of the DC Taxicab Commission. That seems like an awfully big title, and you seem awfully young to have that title. So what brought you to be the chairman of the DC Taxicab Commission?
Well, certainly the name evokes a sense of something big, and the facial looks tends to skew towards something of the younger population. But I was appointed by Mayor Miro Bowser last year to help lead the taxicab industry into the future. So that was based on the premise that the industry is rapidly evolving, and we have to prepare not only drivers, companies, and passengers for the future, but also provide them with tools so that they can move from point A to point B in an affordable manner and accessible manner.
Okay. Well, before we get too far into the taxicab industry, let's learn a little bit more about you. So where are you from originally? Or where do you consider home?
I'm Ghanaian.
Okay.
So you can say I'm from Ghana.
Okay.
I've adopted Washington, D.C. as my second home because I've spent 2 decades here. And I love the city, I love the culture, and I love the opportunities that are available in this area.
Okay, so what was it that brought you to Washington, D.C.? Was this your first stop in America, or?
It certainly was. I came to Washington, D.C. for college. I attended the American University, and after college, I ended up working at a couple of firms in the area, and then went to business school, and then continued working, and glad to still be in the area to raise my family.
Oh, okay. So 20 years in D.C. What is it about the area that is that really, I guess, keeps you going, I guess? Or?
I think the great thing about the district is the idea that the world revolves or centers on activities that happen in the capital, whether it's Capitol Hill or it is Adams Morgan. The opportunity to experience different cultures in a relatively small geographical area has been fascinating for me.
Okay. Well, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I just want your opinion on this. Since you've been a world traveler, so where do you find the food better? Was the food better in Ghana, or was the food better once you got here?
That's a tough question, Chris. I have to say Ghana is one, and in a close second will be Washington, D.C.
Second, okay. All right, so what brought you to be the head of the D.C. Taxi Commission?
I was appointed by Mayor Miro Bowser last year to help move the industry forward. As you are aware, the industry is undergoing rapid change with the introduction of ride-sharing technologies and different forms of mobility. So to make sure that people who have invested in the industry or those who continue to invest have expanded economic opportunities, it was high time the industry reinvented itself. And it is a complex problem given all the stakeholders involved. So the need was to apply innovative solutions to the challenges that the industry faces so that almost everybody has a fair shot of economic success.
Okay. So how does the DC Taxi Commission play into the success of the African diaspora?
You can look at it in the context of the number of drivers who are of African descent, or even the number of business owners who have ties to the African continent, or even the number of passengers who interact with people with a connection to Africa. In the District of Columbia, we have roughly 13,000 licensed drivers, and a significant proportion of them, close to 70%, are of African descent or have a direct connection to Africa. And one of the things that we've learned is that the money they make does not always stay here. There are people back home who depend on the drivers or the company owners for livelihood. So if you think about it in the context of the multiplier effect, the revenue generated by the industry impacts not only the district and the surrounding jurisdictions, but also various countries back in Africa.
So do you feel, I guess, so it's a good way for somebody just coming to the country to make a living, or?
That has been the traditional play.
Yeah.
The idea of driving a vehicle for hire, whether it's a taxi, it's a limousine, it's a private vehicle, is a way of making good, quick money without a lot of investment. Mm-hmm. That is why now we have what we seen as being labeled the gig economy. People who want to work part-time and a few dollars here and there are able to leverage that opportunity that is available by being a driver.
Oh, okay. So, and how much money you say would somebody make? I guess, does it depend on how often you work, or?
Yes, certainly. There's a direct relationship between the hours that you put in and what you get out of it. We are seeing average fares for taxis around the $20 mark, depending on the season, and sometimes a $15 mark, depending on the season. So if I want to make $200, that is my target, I have to be thinking about at least 5 hours. And if you look at even some of the high value trips, so for example, a trip from somewhere in Northwest Washington, D.C. to Dallas Airport, that puts you at maybe about $40. So by just making that one trip, you almost doubled what you could have done in a couple of hours. So the opportunity is there. However, to make it in the environment that we have, that is simply not enough. As the regulator, one of the core things we are focused on is expanding economic opportunities, not just for drivers, but also companies. That is why we're making investments in mobile technologies. We're making investments in application program interfaces so that different softwares can talk to the technology in the vehicle so that the drivers can participate in deliveries if they choose to.
So how hard is it to become a taxi driver? What exactly do you have to go through?
There are a few steps. There are a few steps, starting primarily with a background check because of the safety concern. And in the District of Columbia, as well as many jurisdictions, quite frankly, to become a taxi driver, you have to pass a criminal background check based off your fingerprint. That has been the gold standard so far for background check. You also have to pass certain educational requirements. You have to have some knowledge of the boundaries of the district so that you can provide service to tourists. And there are a few other requirements to overcome to be a licensed driver.
Oh, okay. And so I guess, is that a good place to start, or I guess where would you suggest somebody else goes if they wanted to go beyond just being a taxi cab driver? Is there ways to move up in the industry, or is it just kind of, is there any, I guess how would somebody get to your position from being a taxi cab driver? Would that be possible?
There's a difference. Everything is possible, but there is a difference. If you are a driver and you want to be the chairman of the commission, you would have to be an employee of the District of Columbia. The thing that makes driving unique compared to other forms of jobs is that you set your own hours and you are working in an environment that is regulated. So if somebody wants to be, an employee of the District of Columbia, they'll have to go through the HR process for that. But it is an industry that is exciting in the sense that you set your own hours, you own your own business. At the core of it, you're a business owner, you're an entrepreneur. So if you provide good service, you seek opportunities, you can make as much as you want to.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back to continue our conversation with Ernest Chopra. Please stay tuned.
Morning, Gary. We are GetSchooled.com. You want a college education, don't you? Gary, financial aid forms. Biology homework, G. What? Picking a college, man. You and us go together like tacos and Tuesday.
And I love tacos.
Welcome back. I'm here with Mr. Ernest Chopra, the chairman of the DC Taxicab Commission. So right now we want to talk about what are some of the changes that the taxicab industry are facing, especially with new programs coming out like Uber and Lyft? I guess, what do you see? How is that affecting the taxicab commission, or how is that affecting taxicab drivers?
The biggest change that is underway is the scope of the responsibility for the Taxicab Commission. If you just go off the name, you might assume we only deal with taxis, and that is quite the opposite. We regulate taxis, limousines, black cars, ride sharing, digital dispatch, and ride sharing and digital dispatch has become synonymous with Uber, Lyft, Split, and a company called Wheels. Those are the digital dispatch companies licensed in the District of Columbia, in addition to Yellow and also Total Transportation. So the ecosystem as we have it today is much broader than what we had in 1985 when the DC Taxicab Commission was established. So along with just having an expanded scope of responsibility, we have to deal with driver conditions, our drivers making a decent living. We have to deal with firms and companies. Are they making a reasonable return on their investment? There are other issues we have to deal with. We have to deal with the changing demographics and population. With the aging boomer population, we have to make sure that across all modes of transportation that we regulate, there is sufficient accessible vehicles so that passengers with disabilities are not left behind. They have equal access to the extent possible. We also have to deal with congestion because as we are seeing more roads and more vehicles on the roads, the question becomes what has been the impact on the environment and traffic. So we are making certain investments to make sure that the future is sound and the industry is viable. Some of the investments we've made have focused on electric vehicles. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll be introducing a fleet of about 19 vehicles, the first ever fleet of electric vehicles in the District of Columbia. And we don't own the vehicles. We don't own any vehicle, quite frankly. But we've used our grant-making authority to provide financial incentives for drivers and owners to buy vehicles that are more environmentally friendly and also provide better customer experiences. We've also made investments through our grant-making authority for people to buy wheelchair-accessible vehicles. Today, there are over 170 wheelchair-accessible vehicles in the District of Columbia in operation. So that means a passenger who is in a wheelchair is more likely to find a transportation option today than 3 years ago. But that is simply not going to be enough. We are also making investments in educating drivers about the boundaries of the district, how to provide better service. We are also making investments around predictive analytics so that we can provide information to owners and drivers about where the fair opportunities are. Because when it's all said and done, people get into this industry because they want to make money. And we think the government has a role in ensuring that the ecosystem is healthy, where firms can make money, drivers can make money, consumers are protected, and we continue to align the industry with the interest of the riding public.
So what are some of the biggest challenges you faced in your first year as the chairman?
I'll say the number one challenge has been perception about the industry. Most people think we are all about taxis.
Right.
And if you look at the number of taxis in comparison to the other types of vehicles, taxis are pretty much the smallest proportion. For example, in the District of Columbia, we have less than 6,500 active taxis, but we have several thousands. I mean, we are talking about northwards of 55,000 private vehicles for hire. Then you also have black cars and limousines. So if you look at the numbers, just based on the number of vehicles alone, you can easily see how taxis just represent a small segment compared to the other types of vehicles. So perception is one thing. Another element of perception is that the taxi driver is technology averse. That is quite simply not the case. If you look at the vehicles that are in operation today, there's quite a bit of sophisticated technology, largely driven by the adoption of smartphones. So whether it is through an app for a driver to connect to a passenger, or using that same app to have access to delivery opportunities, I think that's an indication of the adoption of technology. More importantly, when you look at passengers with disabilities, there are various types of disabilities, not just physical, there's also cognitive, there's visual, and as a society, we have to shy away from the misconception, I would say, that people with disabilities are second or third class citizens. We are all human, and everybody needs access to service. So those are some of the challenges that we have. Another challenge we have is that the industry is rapidly evolving. So rather than wait and have the industry be disrupted, it's become important for the government to be a change agent in the context of promoting competition, because competition is what brings the best out of participants in the marketplace.
So do you feel that Uber and groups like Lyft have kind of came in and shifted the whole, how the industry's been, or just how the industry works in general?
I'm not quite sure if they've shifted how the industry works, because what we've found from our research and data is that consumers or passengers just want a ride. They want a ride that is safe, reliable, and affordable. So whether it is going to be from Chris Transportation or Ernest Transportation or District Transportation, that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that consumers have access to different types of rides. So it's about a ride. Now, if a company becomes very good at marketing their network of drivers, then that is the great thing you can expect from competition. So I say that to frame the debate in the context of consumer choice and options. And whoever provides the best service, directly or indirectly, should win.
And I guess, is that what you've seen happen, I guess, in the industry? I guess, has the number of taxi cabs shrunk, I guess, in the past few years with the advent of new technology?
I wouldn't say it shrunk. Quite frankly, the data suggests the opposite, because 2 years ago, you didn't have 6,500 vehicles being active. Currently, that is the number. And that is because people see an economic opportunity to operate a taxi in spite of the regulations that exist. On the private vehicle for hire side, yes, there's been an explosive growth, largely because of the convenience of electronic hail. But when it's all said and done, we see this as a moving target, where a driver should be making a decision. How much time do I want to be behind the wheel? And how much do I want to make? And I can choose to drive a taxi, a limousine, or use my private car, because I'm an independent contractor. So the notion of who a cab driver is actually changing.
There you go. And an interesting thought about that. Now, I've been reading a lot about Google and some of these other companies testing driverless cars. So what would a driverless car mean for the taxi industry? And do you see that in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, we are not talking about 10 years. We're talking about next year.
Yeah. Okay.
Because currently, different firms are testing autonomous vehicles. I have this funny experience where we were heading down Massachusetts Avenue, and we saw a gentleman who was texting and driving. And I made a comment to my wife that, see that? next year he can do that, and it's going to be safe because there's going to be another dude that is a robot telling the car drive 30 miles per hour because the speed limit is 30 miles per hour. So the idea of driverless cars is something that I think the DC industry would welcome, because now instead of having to own a fleet of, let's say, about 50 cars or 100 cars, I may own just 2 driverless cars, and I'll have to conduct a reasonable number of trips.
All right, well, Mr. Sharp, we're going to take another quick break. We hope you stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Don't worry, 74 people were picked before me in the NFL draft.
To fight childhood obesity, United Way and the NFL are helping kids play at least 60 minutes a day.
Okay, time for the team obstacle course. Yay!
What this place needs is more healthy kids. To get involved or donate, go to unitedway.org/play60.
Now I get it.
Well, welcome back to the African Community Forum. I'm joined with Mr. Ernest Chopra, the chair of the DC Taxicab Commission. And Mr. Chopra, so what do you see some of the partnerships the Taxicab Commission can get into going on in the future? I know like Uber is doing Uber Eats where they'll deliver food. Is that something that you would consider doing?
From the commission perspective, our strategy is not to provide direct service that competes with the entities that we regulate. So what we've been able to do to further that strategy is to provide an open infrastructure that smarter technologists, smarter entrepreneurs, startups can tap into. So for example, a few weeks ago, we announced a partnership with a company called Delivery.com. Okay. They have a website and a mobile application that allows consumers to order food and a few other items. The partnership is a public-private sector partnership. So we effectively collaborated so that users of the Delivery.com mobile application can place an order to a restaurant. When the order goes to the restaurant and the food is prepared within the time constraints that is required, instead of restaurants having to set up a delivery infrastructure, they can simply pass on their request to an available cab that is open, that is nearby. And this is all being orchestrated using the technology called Application Program Interfaces, APIs. It allows different systems to talk. It is a demonstration project. It is a pilot. We've had further conversations with other partners, and we look forward to rolling out more features. But the fundamental idea is that by having the government partner with the private sector, you can see more innovation. We enable innovation in that private companies don't have to start from scratch. There is a fleet of 6,500 taxis moving around the District of Columbia, and once they have available capacity, somebody can tap into that capacity to create value. So that's one of the things that we are very proud of.
Okay, all right. It sounds like a pretty interesting idea. It sounds like a good way to go. So I guess, and so what are some of the things that you have learned being the Taxicab Commissioner over the past year?
There's a lot that I've learned. One is to continue listening to our customers. Our customers are not just drivers, companies, but also passengers. And what we've learned is that people are beginning to see the benefits of having newer vehicles on the road, more educated drivers who have been trained on how to service different constituents, including passengers with disabilities. What I've also learned is that the financial incentives that we've been able to provide the industry is working, because a year ago, people did not have an easy way to the middle class. Now we've invested over $1 billion over 2 fiscal years, thanks to the City Council and the Mayor for providing us with those financial resources. And now people have been able to buy wheelchair accessible vehicles. They've been able to buy electric vehicles. They are able to rent vehicles at a rate that is much lower than what they would have incurred without those financial incentives. So people now can move around easier. Drivers are seeing a change in their income, and companies are beginning to reinvest in the industry.
Okay. All right. Well, in our last few moments here, let me ask you, is there anything that I haven't asked you or anything that you would like to share about the taxi cab industry and about the future?
Yes, it is less about the taxi cab industry. It's easier to use the name taxis, but taxis as we know it has always been evolving from horse-drawn carriages to what is going to be autonomous vehicles. So if the word taxi, people will associate it with moving around, then that makes a lot of sense. But if people will associate it with negative perceptions, then they live in a different world than what we actually have, because the individuals who make a commitment to helping visitors or residents move around takes a lot. They have a service orientation. There is livelihoods at stake. And as the industry continues to evolve, we will not only be paying attention to the data, but we'll also be paying attention to the impact to the environment, the impact from a social perspective, and also the economic impact. And we always have to have an orientation that change can be good if we help people make that leap.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like great. So do you think there'll ever be a day where it'll just be strictly regulated, where like you have to have a, I guess, well, not only just a driverless vehicle, but it also has to be a hybrid vehicle in order for it to be considered a taxi?
Well, those are the choices we'll have to make as a society.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to London, I believe there is congestion pricing around certain times when everybody's trying to rush to the city center. That is what they've adopted to manage congestion. As a society, we have to look at our values and say, one, do we want driving for hire to be a viable path to the middle class? Do you want to make sure that people who participate in the industry make a decent living? As you know, there's ongoing debate about what should be the appropriate minimum wage, you know, but we cannot leave people behind when we are going through economic development, because that can lead to social disruptions. We also have to ask ourselves, how do we continue to make a vehicle for hire as safe as humanly possible? So whether it's investments in automatic braking technology or different measures, we have to keep pushing the envelope so that we make vehicles much safer for drivers and passengers. We also have to look at the environment that encourages firms to invest, because if firms invest in a fleet of vehicles and they don't get a decent return, there will be retrenchment, which will mean it will be more difficult for people to move around. So there are a lot of complex issues, and it's only going to get worse, but the humankind has proven over centuries to be able to overcome problems by, one, accepting that there are problems, and two, recognizing that talent, ingenuity, dialogue can help us overcome barriers and measuring success.
Well, Mr. Sharper, we would like to thank you so much for joining us today on the African Community Forum. Unfortunately, we've ran out of time, but we've learned a lot that the Taxicab Commission is not just taxis, it's so much more. And there's such a great economic opportunity in there for the African diaspora. But so thank you for joining us this time, and we'll see you again soon.